The sun was just starting to dip behind the hills when Tom Parker stood on his front porch, wiping sweat from his forehead after a long day of fence repair. He took a deep breath and smiled. The sweet smell of fresh grass and wildflowers filled the air, mixing with the earthy scent of his vegetable garden nearby. This little slice of heaven, 10 acres of rolling pasture on the edge of Pinewood County, had been his dream for as long as he could remember. 5 years ago, Tom had finally saved enough from his construction job to put a down payment on this land. It wasn't fancy by any means. A modest 3-bedroom ranch house with weathered wooden siding, a large barn he'd built himself, and enough space for his 3 horses to roam freely. What made it perfect was the peace and quiet. After growing up in a crowded apartment in the city, Tom treasured every moment of the silence that surrounded his property, broken only by the occasional neighing of his horses or chirping of crickets. "Come on, Rusty," Tom called to his old, golden retriever who was sniffing around the garden. "Dinner time, boy." As they walked toward the house, a cloud of dust rose from the dirt road that cut across the front edge of his property. Tom squinted as a gleaming white SUV barreled down, the private road moving much too fast. The vehicle's tires kicked up rocks and dirt as it passed, leaving a trail of dust that drifted over Tom's freshly planted tomatoes. "What the?" Tom muttered, watching as the SUV disappeared around the bend toward the fancy subdivision next. The Oakwood Estates had sprung up about 2 years after Tom bought his land. Luckily, his property remained just outside the development's boundaries, which meant he didn't have to deal with their strict rules about everything from lawn height to mailbox color. The houses there started at $500,000, with perfect green lawns and matching shutters. Tom had nothing against his neighbors. He kept to himself and expected others to do the same. Until recently, that arrangement had worked fine. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. That white SUV had started appearing on his private road almost daily. At first, Tom figured it was someone who got lost looking for the subdivision's main entrance. But after the 3rd or 4th time, he realized this was becoming a pattern. The next morning, Tom was up at dawn as usual. He fed the horses, Penny, Blaze, and Old Thunder, before starting his chores. He was repairing a loose board on the chicken coop when he heard the unmistakable sound of tires on gravel. Right on schedule, the white SUV was cutting through his property again. This time, Tom raised his hand, signaling for the driver to stop. The SUV slowed reluctantly, and the window lowered just enough for Tom to see a woman with perfectly styled, blonde hair and large sunglasses looking impatiently at him. "Morning," Tom said, approaching the vehicle slowly. "I noticed you've been using this road pretty regularly." "Yes, and?" The woman's voice was sharp, her fingers tapping on the steering wheel. "Well, ma'am, this is actually a private road. It's part of my property," Tom explained, pointing to the no trespassing sign that stood about 20 feet back, partially hidden by an overgrown bush. "I don't mind folks using it in an emergency, but it's not really meant for regular traffic." The woman sighed loudly and pushed her sunglasses up onto her head. "I'm Nancy Wilson, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association," she said, as if announcing royalty. "This looks like a public access road to me. There's no gate, and it cuts 7 minutes off my drive to our community center for meetings." Tom scratched his head. "I understand it's convenient, Mrs. Wilson, but I maintain this road myself. All the gravel you see? I laid that last summer. The culverts that keep it from washing out during rainstorms, I dug those too. It's definitely private property." Nancy's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, I've been using it for weeks with no issue. Honestly, your farm here already affects our property values. The least you could do is allow access to this road." Before Tom could respond, Nancy lowered her sunglasses, rolled up her window, and accelerated away, leaving him standing in another cloud of dust. That evening, Tom sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to make sense of the encounter. He wasn't an unreasonable man. If Nancy had asked politely, maybe they could have worked something out, but her attitude rubbed him the wrong way. Over the next few days, Tom noticed the white SUV continuing to use his road, sometimes twice daily. Each time, Nancy would speed up when she saw him, clearly avoiding another conversation. Tom placed another, larger private property sign at the entrance to the road, but it didn't make any difference. One Thursday afternoon, it was pouring rain, the kind of heavy downpour that turned dirt roads into mud pits. Tom was in the barn, making sure the horses were dry and comfortable, when he heard the sound of an engine revving. Through the rain-streaked windows, he could see Nancy's SUV had veered off the dirt road entirely. She was driving across his east pasture, creating deep tire tracks in the soft, muddy ground. "You've got to be kidding me," Tom muttered, throwing on his raincoat and rushing outside. By the time he got to the pasture, Nancy was gone, but the damage was clear. 2 deep ruts cut across nearly 50 yards of his land, right through the area where his horses grazed. The next morning, Tom discovered something that made his blood boil. Penny, his youngest mare, was limping. She had stepped into one of the deep ruts and twisted her ankle. As Tom carefully wrapped Penny's leg with a support bandage, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the slow burn of genuine anger. This wasn't just about an entitled neighbor anymore. Nancy's carelessness had hurt one of his animals. "That's it," Tom said to Rusty, who was watching him tend to the horse. "Time to have a real conversation with Mrs. HOA president." He didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of a neighborhood battle that would test his patience, creativity, and resolve in ways he never imagined. And though Tom Parker was a peaceful man by nature, he was about to discover just how far he'd go to protect what was his. "Another thing to thank Mrs. Wilson for," Tom muttered as he gently brushed Penny's chestnut coat. He'd spent the morning fixing the pasture as best he could, filling in the deep ruts with soil and tamping it down. His back ached from the labor, but his determination hadn't wavered. Today, he would try again to reason with Nancy. Tom had always believed most problems could be solved by talking things out. Growing up with 4 brothers taught him that fighting rarely solved anything for good. So despite his frustration, he decided to give diplomacy another shot. He waited by his mailbox around the same time Nancy had driven through yesterday. Sure enough, the white SUV appeared right on schedule, slowing slightly at the sight of Tom standing by the road. "Mrs. Wilson," Tom called out, raising his hand in what he hoped was a friendly gesture. "Could I have just a quick word?" The SUV came to a stop and Nancy lowered her window halfway, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy day. "I'm running late for a meeting," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "What is it?" Tom took a deep breath and kept his voice level. "I wanted to let you know that when you drove through my pasture yesterday, one of my horses was injured stepping in the rut your car made. She's going to be okay, but are you accusing me of something?" Nancy cut in, her voice sharp. "I had an emergency HOA situation. The road was muddy. I did what I had to do." Tom blinked, surprised by the interruption. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just asking if you could please stick to the public roads, or at least stay on my dirt road if you absolutely need to cut through. The pasture isn't safe for—" "Look, Mr.—" She paused, clearly not remembering his name. "Parker. Tom Parker. Mr. Parker. As president of Oakwood Estates, I have certain responsibilities that sometimes require flexibility. She waved her hand dismissively. "Ranch situation here is already a concern for our community's property values. The least you could do is be accommodating when necessary." Tom felt heat rising to his face but kept his cool. "My property isn't part of your HOA, Mrs. Wilson. I've maintained this land myself for 5 years and I've always been a good neighbor. All I'm asking is for you to respect my property the same way I respect yours." Nancy's perfectly manicured fingers drummed on the steering wheel. "I'll take your concerns under advisement," she said flatly. Then, without another word, she rolled up her window and drove off, faster than necessary, the SUV's tires spraying gravel. Tom stood there for a moment watching the dust settle. "That went well," he said to no one in particular, his voice heavy with sarcasm. That evening, Tom sat at his kitchen table writing a formal letter to the Oakwood Estates HOA board. He wasn't much for writing, but he laid out the situation as clearly as he could. The repeated trespassing, the damage to his property, and the injury to his horse. He asked for their help in resolving the matter, and suggested they remind community members to respect neighboring properties. 3 days later, the letter was still sitting on his counter, unmailed. That morning, Tom had spotted Nancy, driving, through again, this time with another woman in the passenger seat. They'd both looked at his property and laughed about something. The sight had made him wonder if sending the letter would make any difference at all. Instead, Tom drove to the county sheriff's office. Sheriff Dan Taylor had been in his position for nearly 15 years, and Tom had voted for him in every election. Surely the law would be on his side here. The sheriff's office was quiet when Tom arrived. After a 10-minute wait, he was shown into Sheriff Taylor's office, a small room with wood-paneled walls covered in fishing photos and community awards. "Tom, haven't seen you in a while," the sheriff said, standing to shake his hand. "How are those horses of yours doing?" "That's actually why I'm here, Dan," Tom said, settling into the chair across from the desk. He explained the situation in detail, concluding with Penny's injury. The sheriff listened, occasionally nodding, his weathered face unreadable. When Tom finished, Sheriff Taylor leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "I understand your frustration, Tom. I really do. But this kind of thing," he gestured vaguely, "it's more of a neighbor dispute than a law enforcement matter." "But she's trespassing," Tom said. "There are signs clearly posted, and now there's property damage and a vet bill." Sheriff Taylor rubbed his chin. "Has she threatened you? Damaged your house? Stolen anything?" "Well, no, but look, I can send Deputy Miller out to have a word with her if you want. But between you and me, these HOA types, they tend to have friends in the county offices, and technically proving damages would require you to file a civil suit." Tom's heart sank. "So there's nothing you can do? My advice? Put up a gate, or try to work it out between neighbors. These things have a way of escalating if the law gets too involved." The sheriff stood up, signaling the end of their conversation. "I'm sorry I can't be more help, Tom." The drive home felt longer than usual. Tom's truck rattled over the potholes in the county road as he mulled over the sheriff's words. He'd always respected Sheriff Taylor, but today's meeting left him feeling abandoned by the very system that was supposed to protect his rights. As Tom turned onto his property, his headlights caught something that made him slam on the brakes. There, cutting diagonally across his vegetable garden, were fresh tire tracks. Tomato plants lay crushed under the tread marks that led straight from his dirt road, through his carefully tended garden, and toward the subdivision. Tom got out of his truck and stared at the destruction in disbelief. The garden he'd spent countless hours on, planting, weeding, watering, was partially ruined. And for what? To save a few more seconds on Nancy's precious commute? Standing there in the fading light, looking at his trampled vegetables, something shifted inside Tom Parker. He was done being nice, done trying to reason with someone who clearly had no respect for him or his property. "All right, Nancy Wilson," he said quietly to the empty evening air. "If you want to play it this way, I'm game." Tom turned back to his truck, a plan already forming in his mind. If diplomacy had failed, it was time for a different approach entirely. And he knew just where to start. Tom's fingers moved quickly over his phone as he scrolled through his contacts. He paused at a name he hadn't called in months and hit the dial button. 3 rings later, a familiar voice answered. Well, if it isn't Cousin Tommy." "Let me guess, your tractor broke down again?" Tom couldn't help but smile. "Hey, Pete, tractor's fine, but I've got a different kind of problem, and you're the only person I know who might have a solution." Pete Chen had been Tom's cousin by marriage until Aunt Linda passed away 5 years ago. Though they weren't technically family anymore, they'd remained close. Pete worked as an environmental engineer for the county and had a knack for creative problem-solving. "I'm listening," Pete said, his interest clearly piqued. 20 minutes later, after explaining the whole situation with Nancy Wilson, Tom finished with, "So what do you think? Am I crazy to want to teach her a lesson?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Nope, not crazy at all. But you need to be smart about this, Tommy. Whatever you do has to be completely legal and safe. No actual landmines." Pete chuckled. Of course not. Tom said quickly. I just need something to stop her from driving on my property without permission. As it happens, Pete replied, I might have a few ideas. You free this weekend? That Saturday morning, Pete's dusty pickup truck pulled into Tom's driveway, the bed loaded with supplies covered by a blue tarp. Tom greeted his cousin with a warm hug. You weren't kidding about bringing supplies, Tom said, eyeing the truck. Pete grinned, pulling back the tarp to reveal several sections of metal pipe, a roll of heavy gauge wire, bags of quick-setting concrete, and various tools. Let's just say I've been planning a garden sprinkler system I never got around to installing. Figured we could put the parts to better use. The two men spent the morning walking Tom's property, making notes and measurements. Pete pulled out a small notebook sketching diagrams as they talked through their plan. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking, Pete said, pointing to his sketch. First, we install a proper gate at the entrance to your private road. Nothing fancy, just a standard farm gate with a combination lock. That's completely reasonable for a property owner to do, Tom nodded. I should have done that years ago. Next, Pete continued, we address the places where she's been driving off-road. You said she cut through your garden and across the east pasture, right? Exactly, Tom confirmed. Pete's eyes twinkled with mischief. That's where Operation Landmine comes in. Though I should be clear, we're talking about motion-activated sprinklers, not actual explosives. Tom laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in days. I figured that much. They spent the afternoon digging strategic trenches along the property line and in areas where Nancy had driven off-road. In each trench, they placed heavy-duty garden sprinklers connected to underground PVC pipes. Pete, who had experience with irrigation systems, rigged each sprinkler with a motion sensor connected to a central control box. These are industrial strength, Pete explained as they worked on the fifth sprinkler, the kind they use for crop irrigation. They've got pretty impressive water pressure and a range of about 20 feet. Once these are triggered, anything within range is getting a serious shower. By Sunday afternoon, their project was nearly complete. The new gate stood sturdy at the entrance to Tom's private road, freshly painted with a bright red private property, no trespassing sign. The sprinkler system was entirely hidden underground, with only small motion sensors disguised as rocks visible above ground. Last touch, Pete said, pulling out 3 small trail cameras from his truck. These are solar-powered and weather-resistant. They'll record any activity near the sensors and send alerts to your phone. Isn't this all a bit much? Tom asked, suddenly feeling uncertain about their elaborate setup. Pete placed a hand on his shoulder. Look, Tommy, you tried asking nicely. You tried going through official channels. She damaged your property and hurt your horse. All we're doing is protecting what's yours in a way that's completely legal. Tom knew his cousin was right. He'd exhausted all reasonable options. They mounted the cameras in trees overlooking the key areas, one watching the new gate, one near the garden, and one overlooking the east pasture. Pete showed Tom how to access the camera feeds on his phone and set up motion alerts. As evening approached, they tested the entire system one final time. Tom walked past one of the hidden sensors, and seconds later, a powerful jet of water shot up from the ground, reaching a height of 6 feet before arcing down in a wide spray. Perfect, Pete called out, adjusting something on the control panel. I've set all the sensors to ignore small animals so your chickens won't set them off, but anything car-sized will definitely trigger them. They celebrated their successful installation with steaks on Tom's back porch grill. As they ate, Pete raised his beer bottle in a toast to teaching entitled neighbors a valuable lesson about respecting property lines. Tom clinked his bottle against Pete's. And to doing it completely legally. After Pete left, Tom stood on his porch looking out over his ranch in the fading light. The sprinklers were invisible, the gate looked like a normal farm gate, and the cameras were well hidden. Nothing about his defenses seemed excessive or threatening, just a property owner securing his land. For the first time in weeks, Tom slept soundly that night, Rusty snoring at the foot of his bed. The next 3 days passed without incident. Nancy's white SUV was nowhere to be seen. and Tom began to wonder if she'd finally found another route to her precious HOA meetings. Maybe the gate alone had been enough to deter her. On the fourth day, while Tom was in his workshop building a new feeding trough, his phone buzzed with an alert. He pulled it out to see a notification. Motion detected at East Pasture camera. Tom's heart beat faster as he opened the app. The live feed showed Nancy's SUV attempting to navigate around his new gate by driving through the field adjacent to the road. She had apparently found the one spot where a determined driver could maneuver between two large oak trees to bypass the gate entirely. Right on schedule, Tom murmured, watching intently as the SUV crept forward. The vehicle moved slowly at first, then picked up speed as it cleared the trees. Nancy clearly thought she'd found a clever workaround to Tom's new barrier. She had no idea what was waiting just 20 feet ahead. Tom held his breath as he watched Nancy's SUV roll forward on his phone screen. The vehicle moved confidently, as if Nancy believed she'd outsmarted him completely. Through the windshield, he could see her talking, probably on a hands-free phone, completely unaware of what was about to happen. 3, 2, 1. The first sprinkler triggered with perfect timing. A powerful jet of water shot up from the ground directly in front of the SUV, causing Nancy to swerve sharply. As she turned the wheel, her driver's side window lined up perfectly with the spray. The water blasted through her half-open window, drenching both her and the vehicle's interior. Tom could see her mouth open in what must have been a shocked scream, though the camera had no audio. Her reaction was priceless, a mixture of surprise, outrage, and confusion. She reversed quickly, trying to escape the spray, only to trigger 2 more sprinklers behind her. Now trapped between water jets, Nancy's SUV spun its wheels in the soft grass. Each movement seemed to activate another sprinkler until she was surrounded by a virtual car wash on all sides. Through the cascade of water, Tom could see her frantically rolling up her window and attempting to back out the way she came in. After nearly a minute of chaos, Nancy finally managed to navigate her way out of the sprinkler zone, her once pristine white SUV now muddy and dripping. The camera caught her furious expression as she sped away down the public road, leaving deep tire tracks in her wake. Tom couldn't help but laugh. The system had worked perfectly, maybe even better than he'd hoped. He sent the video to Pete with a quick message. Operation Landmines successful. His phone rang almost immediately. Tommy, that was beautiful. Pete was laughing so hard he could barely speak. Did you see her face when that first sprinkler hit? Worth every penny we spent on those sprinklers, Tom agreed, still chuckling. You know she's going to be furious, right? Pete's tone grew slightly more serious. People like that don't take humiliation well. What can she do? Tom asked. Everything we did is legal. I have a right to protect my property. Just keep your phone handy, Pete advised. Something tells me this isn't over. Pete's prediction proved accurate. Less than 45 minutes later, Tom was checking on Penny's healing leg when he heard vehicles approaching. Looking up, he saw Nancy's SUV, still wet and muddy, pulling up his driveway, followed by a police cruiser and a black sedan. Tom's stomach tightened, but he straightened his shoulders and walked calmly toward the approaching vehicles. Rusty trotted beside him, ears perked with curiosity. Nancy emerged from her SUV first, her designer outfit visibly damp in spots. Her face was flushed with anger as she pointed dramatically at Tom. That's him. That's the man who set dangerous traps on his property, she shouted to the uniformed officer stepping out of the cruiser. Tom recognized Officer Mike Rodriguez, a younger cop who sometimes handled calls in the rural parts of the county. Behind him, a man in an expensive suit exited the black sedan. He had the polished look of a lawyer or businessman. Afternoon, Officer Rodriguez, Tom said calmly, nodding to the policeman. What can I help you with today? Before the officer could respond, Nancy stepped forward, her finger jabbing the air inches from Tom's face. You deliberately set up devices to attack me and damage my vehicle. I want him arrested immediately for vandalism and assault. Officer Rodriguez held up a hand to quiet her. Ma'am, please, let me handle this. He turned to Tom. Mr. Parker, Ms. Wilson here has filed a complaint against you. She claims you installed some kind of water devices that damaged her vehicle when she was driving through your property. Water devices, Tom repeated innocently. You mean my new sprinkler system for watering my pasture? The man in the suit stepped forward. I'm Richard Taylor, Vice President of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. Mrs. Wilson was acting in her official capacity when this incident occurred. Tom nodded politely, but addressed the officer. Officer Rodriguez, I recently installed a sprinkler system on my property to help with irrigation. The sprinklers are motion-activated to conserve water. They're completely standard agricultural equipment. Nancy made a noise of disbelief. They're traps. He set them up specifically to target me. Ma'am, Tom said calmly, why would my sprinklers be targeting you unless you were on my private property without permission? Officer Rodriguez looked from Tom to Nancy, his expression revealing nothing. Mr. Parker, may I see these sprinklers? Of course, Tom replied. But first, I think there's something else you should see. Tom pulled out his phone and opened the security camera app. He showed Officer Rodriguez the footage of Nancy driving around his gate, trespassing on his property, and then getting caught in the sprinklers. He then pulled up older footage showing Nancy driving across his pasture and garden on previous occasions. As you can see, officer, Ms. Wilson has been regularly trespassing on my property. Despite the no trespassing signs I have posted, she's damaged my garden, created ruts in my pasture that injured one of my horses, and repeatedly ignored my requests to stop using my private road as her personal shortcut. Officer Rodriguez reviewed the footage carefully, occasionally glancing up at Nancy, whose face had gone from angry red to a paler shade. Ms. Wilson, the officer finally said, it appears you were indeed trespassing on Mr. Parker's property. When the incident occurred, the footage clearly shows you deliberately going around a gate marked private property. But he set traps, Nancy spluttered. They're sprinklers, ma'am, Officer Rodriguez replied, his voice professionally neutral but with the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes. Farmers use them all the time. There's no law against having sprinklers on your own property. Richard Taylor cleared his throat. Surely there's something illegal about setting up devices specifically designed to spray water at passing vehicles. Tom shook his head. They're designed to water my fields based on a timer and motion detection. That's all. If someone happens to be trespassing when they activate, well, he shrugged. That's unfortunate timing. Officer Rodriguez turned to Nancy. Ms. Wilson, Mr. Parker has the right to secure his property and install agricultural equipment as he sees fit. Based on this evidence, you were trespassing at the time of the incident. In fact, you've been trespassing repeatedly according to these videos. Nancy's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Furthermore, the officer continued, if Mr. Parker wanted to press charges for the damage to his garden and pasture, and the veterinary bills for his injured horse, he would be well within his rights to do so. The color drained completely from Nancy's face. Richard Taylor placed a hand on her arm as if sensing she might topple over. That won't be necessary, officer, Tom said quietly. All I want is for Ms. Wilson to respect my property boundaries from now on. Officer Rodriguez nodded. I think that's a reasonable request. Ms. Wilson, I strongly advise you to use public roads going forward. Next time, Mr. Parker might not be so forgiving. Nancy stared at Tom with a mixture of disbelief and hatred before allowing Richard to guide her back to her SUV. As they drove away, Officer Rodriguez lingered behind. Nice sprinkler system, he said with the ghost of a smile. My uncle uses something similar for his alfalfa fields. Tom nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral. They're very efficient. I bet they are, the officer replied, tipping his hat before heading back to his cruiser. Stay dry, Mr. Parker. As the police car disappeared down the driveway, Tom finally allowed himself a smile. Round one had gone to the simple rancher over the HOA president, but somehow Tom knew the battle was far from over. The next morning, Tom was surprised to find 3 cars parked at the end of his driveway. As he approached, coffee mug in hand, several people got out and waved to him. He recognized a few of them as residents from Oakwood Estates, though he'd never spoken to them before. "Morning," Tom said cautiously. "Can I help you folks with something?" A tall man with gray hair stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Parker, I'm Alan Wilson. We live in Oakwood Estates, and we wanted to apologize for what's been happening." Tom shook the man's hand, confused. "You're Nancy's husband," Alan confirmed with a grimace. "Though I'm almost embarrassed to admit that after yesterday's performance." A woman in gardening clothes stepped forward. "I'm Doris Campbell. I live 2 doors down from the Wilsons. We all heard about what happened yesterday with the sprinklers and the police." "Word travels fast," Tom said, not sure how to respond. Alan nodded. "It was the talk of the neighborhood last night. Nancy came home soaking wet, ranting about pressing charges against you. When she told us what actually happened, that she'd been cutting through your property for weeks and damaged your garden and hurt your horse, well, a lot of us were pretty upset with her, not you." Tom relaxed slightly. "I just wanted her to respect my property. I tried asking nicely first." "We know," Doris said, "and that's why we're here. Several of us were already unhappy with how Nancy's been running the HOA. She's been making decisions without consulting the board, raising fees without explanation, and generally acting like she owns the whole neighborhood." Another neighbor, a younger man in a running outfit, spoke up. "I'm Greg, by the way. Nancy cited me last month for having my trash cans out 10 minutes past the allowed time. Gave me a $50 fine." Tom was surprised to find himself surrounded by people who seemed genuinely on his side. After weeks of dealing with Nancy's entitled behavior, he hadn't expected to find allies from her own neighborhood. Alan cleared his throat. "The thing is, Mr. Parker, what happened yesterday, it was kind of the last straw for many of us. Nancy's behavior was completely unacceptable, and it reflects poorly on our whole community." "Call me Tom," he said, feeling more comfortable with the group. "Would you all like to come up to the house? I can put on a fresh pot of coffee." 20 minutes later, Tom's kitchen was filled with neighbors he'd never properly met before. As they sipped coffee and shared stories about Nancy's reign as HOA president, Tom realized this was the first time he'd had this many people in his home since moving to the ranch. "So what happens now?" Tom asked as the conversation wound down. Alan set down his mug. "We've called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. According to our bylaws, we can vote to remove a board member if they've engaged in behavior that harms the community or breaks the law. Trespassing and then trying to use the HOA's influence to pressure the police definitely qualifies." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "I don't want to cause trouble for your community. I just want to live peacefully on my property." "You're not causing the trouble," Doris assured him. "Nancy did that all on her own." Before they left, Greg surprised Tom with an unexpected question. "Those vegetables in your garden, do you sell them anywhere?" "No," Tom replied. "I just grow them for myself." "Why?" "My wife and I have been trying to eat more local organic produce. If you ever have extra, I bet a lot of folks in our neighborhood would be interested in buying some." Tom scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I never really thought about selling them before. Usually have more than I can eat, though." That evening, Tom received a text from Alan. "Nancy out as president. Vote was nearly unanimous. New president is Joe Rivera, retired judge. Good man. He wants to meet you tomorrow, if that's okay." Tom replied with a simple, "Sure," and went to bed feeling like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in weeks, he slept without worrying about what new damage he might discover in the morning. The next day, a modest sedan pulled up to Tom's gate at precisely 10 a.m. A distinguished-looking man with salt and pepper hair got out and waited by the entrance, respecting the boundary, a courtesy Nancy had never shown. Tom walked down to meet him, Rusty at his heels. "Judge Rivera? I'm Tom Parker." The man smiled warmly and shook Tom's hand. "Please call me Joe. I'm retired now. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Together they walked the property line between Tom's ranch and Oakwood Estates, talking about their respective backgrounds and interests. Joe had been a circuit court judge for 30 years before retiring to Oakwood. Unlike Nancy, He seemed genuinely interested in Tom's ranch and asked thoughtful questions about his horses and garden. "I want to apologize on behalf of our community," Joe said as they reached Tom's damaged garden. "What Nancy did was inexcusable. We've already voted to pay for any damages to your property and the veterinary bills for your horse." Tom was touched by the gesture. "That's very kind, but not necessary." "It absolutely is necessary," Joe insisted. "Good neighbors respect each other's boundaries, both literal and figurative." As they headed back toward the house, Joe paused. "I hear you grow quite the vegetable garden. Several neighbors mentioned your tomatoes looked particularly impressive before the incident." Tom laughed. "They were coming along nicely. You know," Joe said thoughtfully, "our community has been talking about starting a farmer's market in our central park. Once a month, local producers could sell their goods. Would something like that interest you?" Tom considered the idea. "Might be nice to share some of my harvest. I always grow more than I can eat anyway." By the time Joe left, they had agreed to a plan. Tom would participate in the monthly Oakwood Estates Farmers Market, selling his excess produce to the community. In exchange, he would allow emergency access to his private road, with advance notice for community vehicles during their annual road repairs or in case of a genuine emergency. "I'll have our lawyer draw up a simple agreement," Joe said. "Nothing fancy, just something that respects your property rights while allowing for limited pre-approved access in specific circumstances." "Sounds reasonable to me," Tom agreed. Over the next several months, a remarkable transformation took place. The tension between Tom's ranch and Oakwood Estates dissolved, replaced by a mutually beneficial relationship. Tom's produce became highly sought after at the monthly farmers market, and he found himself enjoying the regular interaction with his neighbors. He kept the gate on his private road, and the sprinkler system too, though it was rarely triggered these days. The story of Nancy's soaking had become something of a local legend, with neighbors sometimes joking about the landmines that had finally brought peace to both communities. As for Nancy, she put her house up for sale 3 weeks after losing her position as HOA president. Tom heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to an exclusive gated community on the other side of town. Occasionally, he'd spot her at the supermarket, where she'd promptly turn her cart around and head in the opposite direction. One evening, as Tom sat on his porch watching the sunset with Rusty by his side and Penny grazing contentedly in the pasture, Pete drove up for their monthly barbecue dinner. "How's life with the fancy neighbors?" Pete asked, handing Tom a six-pack of their favorite beer. Tom smiled, looking out over his peaceful ranch. "Turns out most of them are pretty good people. They just needed someone to stand up to the one bad apple." Pete raised his bottle in a toast. "Here's to standing your ground and having the evidence to back it up. And to sprinkler systems," Tom added with a wink. "The most effective landmines a man could ask for." They clinked bottles as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the ranch that Tom had fought so hard to protect. The end